When you talk about an entertainment phenomena, the Elvis Presley image, mystique, and everything else that goes with it still attracts all sorts of attention these days. There's a new book out called Elvis, The Final Years, and it's written by the guest I have on the phone right now, Jerry Hopkins. Jerry, how did you get interested in Elvis to the point where you'd want to write about him?
At the time, I was serving Rolling Stone magazine as Los Angeles correspondent, and I'd been writing books about popular music for a couple of years, and was interviewing Jim Morrison of The Doors for a Rolling Stone interview. This was in the spring of 1969, and at the time I was toying with the idea of doing a biography, but didn't know who I would pick as a subject. In retrospect, it was obvious that I should have picked Elvis. I should have thought of him, but it was Jim Morrison who made the suggestion. He said very simply, "I'd like to read a book about Elvis." So I wrote a book about Elvis, which was published in 1971, and it was dedicated to Jim Morrison, as it happens, because it was he planted the seed. This new book is more or less a sequel to the first one, bringing the story up to date, covering the last 7 years of his life and the couple of years of kind of craziness that followed his death.
Would you say that most entertainers are what you would call colorful characters? And really, would you say that about Elvis? I've heard so many different rumors that Elvis was a victim of popularity and a victim of many, many things. I don't know what your viewpoint is. Was he a colorful character, or would you say that Elvis was really sort of a made-up facade?
No, I think Elvis was clearly a very colorful character. I think that the entertainment business generally is colorful or glamorous, or use whatever adjective you want, and that some of the entertainers are not as colorful as the business they're in. In Elvis's case, the opposite was true. He was far more extravagant, far more. He was as broad as his image seemed to be in the public. He never did anything by halves. And by that I mean if he didn't buy one car at a time, he'd buy a fleet of Cadillacs. He didn't. If he went on a yogurt kick, as he periodically got on various health kicks, he would eat yogurt until it came out of his ears, and in fact would insist that everybody around him, all of his hired hands, do much the same. Elvis lived life in the fast lane, to use a song title from the Eagles. That could very well have been his own theme song. I think Elvis was in his own personal lifestyle as colorful a character as we've had in the entertainment business in decades.
So do you think, in a way, some people are saying, well, he became a victim of himself by being as colorful as he was? If you know what I mean, in order to go out, the popularity of Elvis Presley was so great that I'd heard, had to rent a whole movie theater for himself and his party to go to get away from the crowds.
Well, in a sense, I think that did contribute to his downfall, if that's the right word. His isolation from reality, his being kind of walled off by this coterie of hangers-on and hired hands that I mentioned, did serve to keep him away from the public at large. At the same time, which I think is always dangerous for any entertainer, particularly someone in the popular music business. If you lose your touch with the people, you may end up losing your touch. He came out of country music, and country music stars, as a rule, stay very much in touch with their public. They are very accessible. They're more accessible than any other entertainment group I can think of. Elvis, on the other hand, became completely inaccessible. He went into virtually became a recluse and could not be reached by the outside. I don't think that this was a healthy situation for him, and I think that however called for it might have been in some ways in terms of security for himself and his own family, and he wanted to be let alone and so forth. I do think that it wasn't ultimately perhaps the best thing for him.
A lot of these things we've heard, that he shot out television sets with guns and carried a gun in his belt buckle, for protection on the stage, and he wore a bulletproof vest. Are all these things true from what you can tell from talking with girlfriends and bodyguards and the like?
Yes, they are, and they can all be easily explained, and I don't mean to defend them. By explaining anything, I personally don't care for weapons, but it seems to be a rather common preoccupation amongst many American men, men in many other countries as well, but perhaps more so in America. Elvis was typically American in many ways. His fascination with cars and so on, just points to that in other ways. I can't defend his shooting out television sets or his blasting away at the sides of buildings just to amuse himself. They say that it was done out of boredom, and I guess there was boredom, and if it were me, I'd try to find some other way to relieve that boredom. But yeah, the stories were true. It's Elvis never doing anything by halves. He didn't go to a police firing range. He set up one in his backyard and didn't satisfy himself with a .22. He got a machine gun. That's just the way Elvis was, and I think that the stories we've heard, however blown out of proportion they were in terms of Elvis's life as a total thing, yes, they were true. The unfortunate thing, as far as I'm concerned, is that those are the stories that were told to the exclusion of all others. I wrote this. I originally did not intend to write a second book, and I wrote this book in part because I didn't like some of the books that were published following his death. I felt that they were, however accurate, distorted because of the narrow point of view. Somehow in the stories of all the drugs and the guns and so forth, his music got forgotten. And I don't think you can write a decent book about Elvis or even regard Elvis in any way seriously without considering his music.
So would you say that's how your book differs from say, all the others that have come out?
My book is not a whitewash in any way. I do include, it's one of those biographies, warts and all, as they say. But what I attempted to do was to restore some balance to the picture, some perspective. Fortunately, I also had access to a number of people, including Colonel Parker, who had never given interviews before. Parker gave me his blessings on this book. That is to say, he allowed me to spend some time with him and get some information from him, and allowed me to drop his name whenever I encountered any difficulties in either finding someone or getting someone to agree to an interview. Most of the people I talked to, and I talked to about 75 for this book, had not talked to anyone before and haven't talked to anyone since. The difference between my first book and this one is that I broke through to the inner circle this time. The first time I was operating outside that circle. I think that the major difference between my book and the others that have come out so far is that I tried to consider all aspects of Elvis's life and not just zero in on any one particular characteristic.
Here's a question, and I don't know if you've really thought too much about this, but would Elvis have made it as big as he did without Colonel Parker?
It's always hard to say, but I think he would have made it very, very big. I don't think that he would have perhaps made it as fast as he did with Colonel Parker, and I think that Parker treated Elvis's career in a masterful way, and as a couple of examples, I'll just cite the fact that Elvis was put into retirement, so to speak. I mean, he was not accessible to me or to any other writer, and for very good reason. There's a lot of money to be made in the mystery that surrounds someone who cannot be talked to, surrounds someone who does not make public appearances unless they become public events, and that's the other point. The Colonel managed to arrange Elvis's career as a series of great public events. I just cite as a couple of examples the Aloha satellite show from Hawaii, which was beamed around the world, the first entertainment television show of its type to be done in that way. His return from all of those years making those dopey Hollywood musicals with an NBC special, it became a great event. His Madison Square Garden concerts, his concert at the Astrodome, his return to public appearances in Las Vegas. Each of these concerts and activities were choreographed by Colonel Parker in a manner whereby Elvis made the front pages of the paper even though he didn't show up for the press conference. All the local concert promoter had to do was call a press conference and the media showed up. Elvis was, probably the single name known around the world better than any other, and the Colonel did wonders in keeping it that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because it is a hard question to answer. There's that element of time. Had Elvis come along say, 20 years earlier or later? Would he have made it? So many different factors play a part. I know one of the people that got Elvis one of his first records, the really big ones, was, of course, Heartbreak Hotel. Mayborn Axton wrote it, and she has the highest regards for Elvis. I've had a chance to talk with her a number of times, and it seems the people that I've come across that have known Elvis sort of indicate to me that he was just a super individual, really. Would you agree with that?
I do agree with it, generally speaking. He wasn't without his flaws. I don't suppose any of us are. And when Elvis turned nasty, he probably got nastier than most, just as when he turned generous, he got more generous than most.
Bigger than life, really, in all aspects, then.
Bigger than life in all aspects, and I think the interesting thing is that even many of those, anyway, that he turned against from time to time, still, years after his death, remain fiercely loyal to him. Some, of course, have not remained so loyal, but he did command a kind of loyalty, and I think that the bottom line in talking about Elvis was that he was, whatever else he really was a likable guy.
We're talking with Jerry Hopkins, author of Elvis, The Final Years. Let's break for a commercial or two, and we'll be right back. Jerry Hopkins is our guest, author of Elvis, The Final Years. There's been many books written about Elvis lately. This whole matter of drugs, I guess people are interested in. Was Elvis, do you think, Jerry, hooked on drugs to the point where he really couldn't control the amount that he took in?
Well, I think perhaps that was unfortunately the case. It started innocently enough when he was in the Army back in the early 60s, and his sergeant passed out some uppers in order to ensure that his boys would not fall asleep while standing guard duty in the snow. Later, when he returned to the United States and finished with his Army years and went into the movies, he was always concerned about how he looked, and he had a tendency to put on a little weight because his diet was not the best, and he would eat fattening foods, and he began to take diet pills in order to trim down for his movie roles, or in order to get him from Hollywood back to Memphis when he and his boys would drive non-stop home after completing a film. And as Jerry Schilling, Elvis's close friend for so many years, told me, after a while, one didn't do it, so you started taking two, and after a while, two didn't do it, and the next thing you know, you don't know how many you're taking, and Elvis lived a nocturnal life. His clock was completely the reverse of yours and mine. He got to bed when we'd be getting up, and so on, and that kind of reverse, or that kind of flip-flop in lifestyles led him to take some other drugs. One of the unfortunate things about our society is that drugs are so prevalent a part of it, and I'm talking about coffee and cigarettes and alcohol and all of the tranquilizers and all of the diet pills. And I mean, I've read stories about how many people are dependent to one degree or another upon Valium alone. It's shocking. Elvis, again, was a part of that, and he got caught up in it to a degree that was more extreme than most, perhaps, and I think that ultimately he was one of the many people who got caught.
And again, he could afford drugs, couldn't he?
He could afford anything. He could buy the drugstore.
Yeah.
Sure, he could afford it. And in the entertainment business, unfortunately, drugs of all kinds are very available. And when you're on the road for 30 days in a row, and you're just a series of hotel rooms and airports and limousines and concert stages, sometimes a lot of people just do it to get out of that grind for escape. And I'm not defending it, but I understand why it happens. And we all suffered a great loss when we lost Elvis, and I would hope that perhaps his loss would serve as some kind of example. I don't know whether that will be his final tribute or not. It doesn't seem to have caused any lessening of the use of drugs so far. Mm-hmm. He was a victim of drugs. I'm convinced of it. I don't care whether they say he died of cardiac arrhythmia. The hospital told me that the cause of death was polypharmacy, and I'll accept that. Polypharmacy is what happens when a number of drugs act together in a way that is far greater than the individual effect of each of those drugs.
Mm-hmm. You know, the interesting thing is, too, I don't think it's actually lessened anybody's impression or image of Elvis Presley. Elvis's fans are Elvis's fans, and I think they'll always be fans.
Well, you know, in some cases that may be blind loyalty, but I think that is an interesting point to make, and I'm pleased that is the way it is, because even though Elvis was flawed, and even though Elvis, no matter what kind of stories people tell, you know, that the guy was a decent fellow, and his music stands as you know, a monumental tribute to his life here, and will ensure his never dying in a sense. And I'm pleased that so many people have focused on that rather than on the more salacious stories that have been told.
Jerry, I guess overall we'd like to look at your book, or I think you'd like people to look at your book as actually an honest look then at Elvis and the final years.
Well, I hope people give me that chance. When anybody asks me what I am, I tell them that I'm a journalist. I was trained to try to write in a dispassionate, or at least in a fairly objective manner. And as I say, what I tried to do was to talk to as many people as I could, and to present all sides of the man rather than just one. And I think that's important when we consider looking at any individual. Don't just take one person's word for something or one person's version of a story. There are always at least two sides to that story.
Jerry Hopkins, thank you very much. The name of the book, if you're interested, is Elvis, The Final Years, and it's put out by St. Martin's Press. Lots of luck with it.
Thank you very much.